A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the first week of the COP27. The session on anticipatory action is being organized at a very opportune time because we just had a launch of the Early Warnings for All initiative this last Monday, and on coming Monday, there will be launch of the Global Shield. So we are trying to link early warning and early action, and this session is all about it. If we talk about anticipatory action, the topic itself has evolved over the last 10 years or more. And it's essentially about different elements and different pillars that substantiate the whole topic of anticipatory action. First, we need to know what risks we have. Second, we need to know when to trigger action, that is the right early warning systems. Third, do we have the right plan in place to act, the operational plans or contingency plans? Fourth, do we have the right financing to implement those plans? And fifth, do we have the right institutional capacity to do so? Anticipatory action has evolved over time, and all of us are working together to make it a great success. So this event, during the session today, we will hear from humanitarian and development organizations, which are the main tools, benefits, and needs to scale up anticipatory action approaches. And we'll hear from different national and local voices, practical examples on how this approach can be effective and save lives. My name is Animesh Kumar, and I'm the head of UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction's Bonn office. And just a bit of logistic information before we proceed. This is a silent session, so I request all of you to use headphones so that we can hear, and also it's good for the interpreters. And the session will be interpreted simultaneously in two languages, English and French. Channel 1 is English, Channel 2 is French. So with these words, let me hand over to Julia Stewart-David for a recorded message to kickstart this session. Julia is the Acting Director for Disaster Preparedness and Prevention in DG ECHO. Can we have the video?
Good afternoon from Brussels, from DG ECHO, and thank you very much to the FAO, OCHA, and UNICEF for giving us all this opportunity to talk about the important issue of anticipatory action. While we know that the number of crises and humanitarian needs are growing globally, our humanitarian budgets are under increased pressure every year. And we also know that climate change is considerably worsening the situation. We have extreme increased weather events with frequency, scale, and duration. And most recently, we've seen the catastrophic example of the floods in Pakistan or the droughts in the Horn of Africa. This year, 2022, was the worst ever wildfire season here in Europe, a record breaker. So this climate change is not only disproportionately affecting vulnerable people and communities, but it's also accentuating other kinds of threat. One tragic example is Yemen, where 7 years of war have been combined with recurrent floods and other hazards, and are leading to large-scale displacements and catastrophic hunger. In the face of these challenges, of the extreme weather events, we need to adapt our approaches as humanitarian, from needs-based to complementing that with risk-based and risk-informed approaches. Around half of these disasters are predictable or highly predictable. And so, as a system, we need to be ready to act ahead of these predictable weather events. We need to try and avoid the loss of lives, alleviate suffering, and the damage that is caused, including to people's livelihoods. We already have some positive examples, for example, in Bangladesh, where we're able to evacuate at-risk communities and their livestock ahead of the monsoon season, thanks to the monitoring of rain and river levels in specific areas. Anticipatory action is also very important in building on the resilience of communities that are very hard to reach and very vulnerable, places where humanitarians have access but others don't. We must adapt our approaches to climate change. So as part of this effort, the European Commission and DG ECHO has put in place a pilot programmatic partnership with the FAO in 5 countries in Asia: Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Laos. And we're supporting with 12 million euros over 3 years. We also welcome very much the regional level action in the ASEAN Anticipatory Action Framework. This has been put in place in May 2022. We've seen already how this gives practical action ahead of Tropical Cyclone Noru in Vietnam in September 2022. ECHO is supporting anticipatory action in other regions of the world, with approximately 20 projects currently running globally, and we are committed to scaling this up. In addition to financing, we would also like to support advocacy of anticipatory action. We have some very simple principles here, but in practice, solutions can be complex to implement. And so we need together to work on clear definitions and on triggering criteria. But importantly, we also need to gather the evidence of what is good practice and make the case for more anticipatory action. Not only from humanitarian aid budgets, but also from those of the development side and, importantly, the climate financing. In addition to these resource issues, we would like to put our emphasis on those most vulnerable communities. They are the priority concern, particularly in contexts where climate interacts with conflict and displacement. So our humanitarian action and our humanitarian community must work with development and climate actors to protect the most vulnerable from these trends of climate change and from the shocks that they're already producing in many parts of the world. I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce the session, and I wish everybody a good discussion and a fruitful event.
So thank you. That was Julia from DG ECHO. So moving forward, we have this session in two different segments. The first segment will focus on unpacking anticipatory action, how it sits in the nexus from different approaches. And in the second segment, we'll try to talk about how do we scale up these approaches, taking some examples from the ground. So to introduce the first panel, on my immediate right is Oscar Agdal. He's the Regional Senior Program Officer and Head of Climate and Resilience in WFP Cairo Regional Bureau. We have Ms. Sylvie Webbs, Emergency and Rehabilitation Officer and Resilience Advisor in OER FAO. And then we have Paloma Escudero, Director for Division of Global Communication and Advocacy and Senior Climate Advisor in UNICEF. And Heli Auliki, Deputy Director for Operations and Advocacy Division in OCHA. So I have a common question for OCHA, UNICEF, and FAO. And I would not repeat it, it's a long question, but please give your own take in 3 minutes. Anticipatory action is shown as one of the potential solutions to effectively tackle the climate crisis while reducing current humanitarian needs, and sits at the nexus of humanitarian development, peace, and climate action. So as the world is facing multiple crises at a time when the humanitarian system is already overstretched, how can anticipatory action be brought to scale? What is needed? How can we better connect the humanitarian angle of anticipatory action to the development, peace, and climate action side to multiply the effects? So essentially what Julia was saying, from how to move from needs-based approach to risk-based approach, and how does nexus approaches help strengthen that? So let's start with Heli.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. And you're absolutely right. We have multiple crises. We have absolutely stressed humanitarian financing and resources available. This year, we require in the humanitarian system some $50 billion, which we do not have. At the moment, the humanitarian system is about 40% funded. And with that, we are targeting approximately over 200 million out of 300 million people. When it comes into anticipatory action and the positioning in between or in opposition with Nexus and humanitarian and development and peace action and climate. We do have some very interesting, good lessons learned already when colleagues here will tell also more, that when anticipatory action has been implemented in humanitarian development context, but I would use experiences from SURF-funded anticipatory action project. Central Emergency Fund is an OCHA-managed emergency fund on behalf of Secretary General, and historically some 25% of SURF funding has gone to climate crisis. And we are now implementing and supporting 12 anticipatory action projects with the total pre-committed funding of $140 million over a period of 3 years. And what we have learned that when the risk-based, trigger-based, pre-financed and locally capacitated projects are funded well in advance, provides an excellent opportunity to have clear results with the localized approach. We do have interesting, very good examples from Bangladesh with the partners where we have provided funding prior to the crisis to enable people to prepare, especially in terms of cash assistance, and provide water storage, animal feed and health kits, and also similar lessons learned from South Sudan, Nepal, and I know colleagues will be mentioning about the lessons learned from Somalia. What is important is the evidence, the lessons learned, and how to replicate to ensure that we will be able to scale up in a meaningful manner. I stop there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's then move to Paloma, and let's hear from you. What's your take on the question?
Well, so from UNICEF point of view, what we are talking about here is how to anticipate the actions we need to protect 1 billion children around the world who are at the moment affected by the worst risk of climate crisis. And those 1 billion kids, by the way, 95% of them live in conflict-prone areas. So the interaction is undeniable. And for instance, if we talk about Horn of Africa drought, no surprise to anyone, has been 4 years with no rain. That was brewing. We had experience before COVID. We averted famine in Horn, acting, preparing from 2016, 2017, 2018. Now, COVID, Ukraine war, I don't know what, but it is not surprise that after 4 years with no rain, a crisis of enormous consequences is unfolding, and we are going into response mode and not into the anticipatory action that we had years before. I just come from Pakistan. I flew to Sharm-el-Sheikh from Karachi last Sunday. I visited Sindh, I visited Balochistan, I visited the affected areas of the floods of last month that were exactly the same areas of the floods in 2010. The same. The only thing here is that the rainfalls, the melting of the glaciers, and the scorching heat, I was in Jacobabad, 48, 49 degrees still, have resulted into even bigger rainfall and even bigger disaster. But in that area of Pakistan, before the flooding, there was previous crisis. It was a crisis on nutrition and a crisis on education. 1.6 million children in Pakistan were suffering severe acute malnutrition before the floods. That means that, mostly in rural areas, that means that now what we have to do is to respond to an enormous severe acute malnutrition crisis, because those kids who are so weak, who are not receiving the right food as well, they are living surrounded by dirty water, contaminated, polluted water. So they are the ones at risk of diarrhea, dengue, malaria. And if you are already weak, the risk is back. The anticipatory measures is, once and for all, to be making sure that the money, the response that is not arriving, by the way, in Pakistan, is not only for immediate response. It's also to be addressing politically and humanitarian, with humanitarian means, the malnutrition crisis. And another crisis in Pakistan is the learning crisis, the education crisis. 30% of the whole country is out of school. But in Sindh and Balochistan, it's as high as 50-60%. And UNICEF has established 500 temporary learning centers. And when I enter and ask the kids, who of you is the first time you are inside a classroom? 85% of the girls have never seen a school. 25% of kids have not been in a school. That means that when we are talking about preparedness, capacity building, community work, you are talking about a population who has not the basic literacy to be able to be responding. So I would say that 3 actions that we are working, of course, with OCHA, WFP, FAO, and all our partners, but 3 areas we are working on anticipatory action is capacity building of communities well before. And Bangladesh is always one of the most impressive examples of how really that can work. The second one is partnerships. And partnerships, of course, with the army, with the local communities, but especially in certain countries with religious leaders and community leaders. It is really at local community level where the partnerships have to work. And the third one, and the most complicated one, is flexible funding. Everyone is now asking for immediate food support to Pakistan or to Somalia and to others. It is the pie. This year is very complicated because of COVID. We cannot forget we are still dealing with COVID. And a lot of national health budget has been depleted because they have to work on COVID. So we are working on countries that already their health budgets have been depleted. We are working with countries who are seriously affected still by conflict. And in a lot of cases, like in Africa, are secondary impact of Ukraine war. And of course, no doubt, is the climate crisis that it is multiplying by exponentially the frequency and the scale of the humanitarian situations we are.
Yep.
So on the flexibility funding, and especially with some, I really like a lot the video of the European Union. Very few donors at the moment are really betting and investing on anticipatory action. And that's what we should be investing now, not only on the response. So hopefully, with the climate angle, there will be more donors who will be really putting the eggs in the right basket and investing on anticipatory action.
Thank you, Palome. That's very helpful. And also interesting to note how anticipatory action will work in the context of recurrent crisis and where the crisis is cascading across different sectors. So, Sylvie, let me hear you about the question that you have.
Thank you. For FAO, I would like to bring the agri-food systems. And here we're talking about agri-food systems. That means considering the whole suite of food value chain, from the food produced on the farm to the food arriving on your table. And this is very important because we're taking the approach of a system, agri-food system, taking the approach of multiple risk. Here in this COP, we are focusing, of course, on climate risk, because climate risk are driving more than 80%, I've heard even 90% of the disasters today, climate-related disasters. So multi-actors, so whether you're working at global level or local level, regional, national level, I think it's very important we understand what is risk management and what is anticipatory action. And then we are talking about anticipatory action being part of climate resilience for building a system. And I'd like to connect the anticipatory action to the climate resilience agenda, which is really blending disaster and climate risk management for adapted and resilient systems. Here I'm talking agri-food systems. And I'm insisting on this because the anticipatory action, what is very interesting, and of course it's great that as agencies working together, we have that understanding, and together with the EU and other donors, we are understanding the need to shift from responding to emergencies to managing risk, anticipating and preventing these risks and impacts, because we are overwhelmed. There's not enough funding, there's not enough capacities. We are beyond the the level of coping, really. It is not possible. We're having a number of global crises acting together. And here I'm not talking only about food. The impact on children is very, very visible. So we have the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the health crisis, and all the other more localized crises that interfere with one another. Anticipatory action is valid not only for climate risk and impacts, it's also for other type of crises. And so that's something we've learned, and that's something we're working on the agri-food system. I'm flagging this because the different elements have been mentioned already about anticipatory action. But to do that, you need to understand your risks. Understand your risks in a system, in the type of livelihoods, in the type of activity that you do, in the context where you are. It's going to be different whether in a coastal area, in a mountain area, and the type of livelihoods you have. Understanding these risks and connecting these risks with the type of solution, the type of actions that you have on the ground. And here there's, again, a large taxonomy of risk management action that we have. And, of course, then comes in the funding that was mentioned and the evidence, the cost-benefit analysis. We have the evidence in the agri-food system that it is generating at least 1 to 7 benefits between the cost and the benefits on anticipatory action. I'd like to conclude to flag that the anticipatory action, where we're moving well forward all together, is because it's easy enough to understand and to implement. And this is the COP of implementation, hence the great focus of anticipatory action in this COP. It is important not to focus only on anticipatory action as the magic bullet. No, what it's doing is anticipatory action is connecting to early warnings, risk-proofing infrastructure, nature-based solution, social protection, cash with cash distribution, the whole suite of risk management tools that we have, insurance also. And it has to be part of a shared narrative on building resilience of systems. And here I'm talking about agri-food system, can be water system, education system, housing system. And that's what I would like to focus on and end with. So this is the way forward. Very important to take this as part of the climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie, and very happy to hear from you about the systems approach to working. So I have Oscar Ekdal, my former colleague from WFP. So I have a separate question for you. You come from the Egypt, from this region in Arab states, right? And anticipatory action has been implemented in all the regions, but being the COP in Egypt, what is the current status of anticipatory action in this region, and what is needed to be brought up to the scale?
Thank you very much, Animesh. Glad to be here representing the World Food Programme. So just to say that anticipatory action is a critical area for WFP. Globally, we're talking about 21 countries that we're supporting with anticipatory action and about 2 million people. Bangladesh is one example that keeps coming up. For WFP, we supported about 350,000 people that were affected by floods. And when we did it with an anticipatory approach, what that meant was that typically it takes about 100 days after the disaster strikes for us to respond. With anticipatory action, we were able to provide cash top-ups 4 days earlier, so 4 days before the disaster strikes. Now, in the region, of course, the Arab region, as many of you know, it's facing multiple crises. It's sort of a triple whammy of conflict, economy, and climate, of course. If we think about WFP and our scale of operations being a little bit of an indicator in terms of the worsening situation, in 2010, we supported 6.8 million people in the region with food assistance. 2016, 25 million people. And this year, 37 million people. So things are really worsening, and that's a 5 times increase in about 10 years. So it's really not looking very good. And if you're looking at this year in particular, we have Iraq and Syria facing droughts, probably the worst in about 50 years. Yemen is facing recurrent flash floods. Just since July, we're talking about 300,000 people or more affected by floods. So anticipatory action is really, for WFP, an opportunity to get ahead of the disaster. In August, we released a report that we did together with ODI, and some of you might know Emily Wilkinson, who is one of the leaders globally on anticipatory action, really doing quite amazing work. And we looked at 4 different components. So we looked at the forecasting and early warning and vulnerability analysis capacity that governments have. We looked at the planning, so what type of contingency planning, what type of standard operating procedures are in place. We also looked at the financing, how are governments supposed to finance anticipatory action, or what other finance is accessed in this region. And then we also looked at different delivery mechanisms. So how will we deliver anticipatory action in this region? Now, generally what we saw was that, quite a lot of work remains to be done. There's some fundamentals in disaster risk management that are quite missing in the Arab region, whether it's the policy, the strategy, the coordination mechanism that we need. And especially if we think about coordination between ministries, because it kind of falls a little bit, between different responsibilities, but also how, let's say, producers of data work with the users of data. So how do we make sure that those who need the information actually have it when they need it and in the format that they require? And then, of course, in this region, many regions are facing conflict and economic shocks, but in this region in particular, those represent very important factors that drive vulnerability, that drive food insecurity. And from an anticipatory action angle, I think it's an important challenge for that community to understand, okay, what can triggers and thresholds look like if we want to act anticipatory to an economic shock, for example. So this is something that we're trying to tackle and look at specifically for the region, simply because it's such an important factor for food insecurity. Now, if we want to talk about, pathways for scale up, we identified a few in this region. Of course, there's a lot that can be said about it. We're starting in Jordan and Yemen, and I was in Yemen, the Hadramaut governorate, which is in the southern part of Yemen, and talking to communities there, trying to understand, we know you're affected by flash floods. What happens when a flash flood takes place? And what they were saying is that, well, usually the village that is further up in the wadi, they shoot one time up in the air, and we know a flood is coming. And if you shoot 2 times, we know it's pretty bad. 3 times, it's really, really severe, catastrophic type of event. Now, of course, sometimes there were a bit of confusion around, is it shooting just because of shooting, or is it actually a warning? And so in Yemen in particular, we worked at authority level, governorate level, to try and reestablish the early warning rooms to provide that dissemination of more reliable information to communities through the district manager. So a very localized type of approach, given how the system in Yemen has really broken down. Another area that is super important in this region is to invest more in data preparedness, risk analysis, trying to support forecasting capacity and early warning so we can connect that to a system. And what we're saying in particular is that there is a strong, let's say, tradition and fairly strong institutions when it comes to social protection in this region. And so we're particularly looking at how can we strengthen the social protection system so it can be more shock responsive, so we can provide whatever support it might be. If we use a social protection system, it's usually cash that we provide, which is a very fast way to top up and increase, let's say, the absorptive capacity of communities that are facing a shock. So that is something that we're working on. And then, of course, the third element, which is this coordination piece. How do we really get the different ministers talking to each other? How do we develop, contingency plans that are not just stuck in a drawer somewhere? What type of standard operating procedures are needed? Who should act when and with what financing? But I think on the financing piece, we're still quite a way off. As was also mentioned by my colleague from OCHA, the needs are much bigger than what we have available. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Oscar. So with this, let's close the first segment, and we have a transition time for the next set of panels to take over. So thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause for this first segment, and then we'll keep them engaged for the discussion round. So a video will be played for the transition, and I invite the second. Oh, you need to sit here at the time.
Extreme weather events are causing destruction more frequently and severely than ever before. Storms, floods, heat waves, diseases, and other types of hazards affect millions of people every year. Crises around the world are intersecting and compounding each other, increasing the risk of conflict, displacement, and hunger. The poorest and most vulnerable are hit hardest, adding to record levels of humanitarian needs in decades. By forecasting when hazards will strike, analyzing their risks, agreeing on actions, and enabling financing ahead of time, humanitarian organizations and communities can act before disasters hit. This way, anticipatory action saves lives and livelihoods and ultimately preserves people's self-sufficiency. It's a faster, more efficient, and more dignified way to protect people against predictable crisis. We want to shift the humanitarian system to be more proactive instead of reactive. But for anticipatory action to reach more people, cover more locations, address more types of hazards, and create lasting impacts in the lives of the most vulnerable, more can and must be done. But what will it take? First, when a crisis is imminent, every second counts. Because of that, we have to invest in early warning and readiness to anticipate, especially at the local level. Second, fast help also requires fast and pre-arranged funding. That is why we need to expand flexible, predictable, and coordinated financing. Third, different events in the world increase the risk of disasters. This reality calls for the application of anticipatory action to a wider range of hazards. Fourth, we must find the appropriate solutions for each challenge. This is only possible through exchange, collective learning, coordination, and partnerships all around the world. Fifth, for anticipatory action to become business as usual, it must become an integral part of national disaster management systems. These recommendations reflect our years of experience in more than 60 countries as the Anticipatory Action Task Force. We are formed by 5 organizations: IFRC, FAO, WFP, OCHA, and START Network. Collectively, we have put our resources and expertise into anticipatory action to save lives and livelihoods. The Anticipatory Action Task Force promotes a wider reach of anticipatory action, provides technical support, helps build evidence, and strengthens synergies with global initiatives to support countries. Together, we are calling on communities, organizations, and governments to join us so more people can benefit from anticipatory action. Let's make humanitarian assistance faster, more efficient, and dignified by acting early on predictable crises.
Can you hear me? Yes. So, welcome to the second segment of this very important session on anticipatory action. In the previous segment, we heard from our speakers in terms of the importance of flexible funding before the crisis hits, the importance of capacity buildings and partnerships, adopting a systems approach to an anticipatory action, and integrated approaches to risk management, importance of understanding risk, data, to understand, and then putting in different contexts, because each context is so different. Vehicles for anticipatory action, it cannot work in isolation. So social protection came up in a very strong way, and how all of this then comes together in very different conflict settings and complex environments. So take this forward, we have the second segment with a set of panel that would talk about how do we scale it up in different environments. So sitting immediately on my right is Mr. Nicholas Scherer, Manager for Policy and Advocacy on Anticipation and Disaster Risk Financing in the Anticipation Hub. We have Ms. Oumou Diallo, Young Voices from the Sahel, young climate activist. Welcome. We have Ms. Michelle Yonetani, Senior Policy Officer in the Office of the Special Advisor on Climate Action in UNHCR. And extreme right is Mr. Moru Ruzuman, Additional Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Government of Bangladesh. So let me start with you, Mr. Moru Ruzuman. And Bangladesh was recurrently referred to in the previous segment. It's one of the champions, the country's champion in integrating and implementing anticipatory action. So what is the experience in Bangladesh implementing anticipatory action, and what kind of coordination mechanisms do you have? And because we are a bit behind schedule, let's keep ourselves brief for 3 minutes each.
Thank you, Animesh. I feel honored and I am very pleased to be with you. And you know, Bangladesh is the seventh vulnerable country according to the Vulnerable Risk Index. And according to the IPCC 6th annual report, if we see the forecasting, we see the risk and vulnerability of Bangladesh due to climate change. But since 1970, Bangladeshi people, we are fighting against the climate change. We are fighting against the cyclone, floods, and other disasters. And we are saving our people. And gradually, we have improved ourselves. And so we deserve the champion in this field. And in case of anticipatory action, this approach, this system, we have already adopted in our latest SOD. It is published in 2019, and we have a joint task force coordination headed by many additional secretary, Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, having other 17 members, and out of these 17 members, 6 members are from international organizations like WFP and International Red Cross and like others, and UNFPA also. And one of the successful piloting has been done just in the year 2020 in a flood, and the around 30,000 households, they were given per head 4,000 cash before 4 and 5 days of the occurrence of the severe flood. And this joint program with WFP and the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, and we will provide cash support to more than 130,000 households. Now I will come to the practical situation. Sorry. How we do this? Actually, this is the well-coordinated and leak-proof system. And for this reason, our casualties has come down to single digit. And just the recent past cyclone Sitrang, we are able to evacuate more than 4 million people within 2 days. And we have thousands of volunteers, and we have a very strong team under the command by the Honorable Prime Minister, and with the military, the firefighter, the scouts, the young boys, volunteers, and all. And money is being prepared. More nutritional value food, dry food are being ready. And we have more than 5,500 shelters throughout the country. And we have 327 multi-purpose shelter where we can give shelter to the people. Each shelter has a capacity of 600 to 800 people, and we have 8 rooms. Women and children, they have 2. For disabled person, we have 1 room, and for senior citizens, we have 1 room, and for male, we have 1 room. And we have also 120 cattle shelter. And we also provide food for the cattle. And our anticipatory action, it is mainly depend on the forecasting. Our Department of Meteorology, they provide us the continuous forecasting, and this task force, it is mandated to sit thrice in the year, but during the emergency time, it will sit at many times as required. Now, I will come to other planning. Just this month, before coming to the COP27, starting of the COP27, we have submitted our national adaptation plan. It has been prepared on the basis of scientific evidences given by the IPCC, on the basis of the practical reality, our geographical location, geographical characteristics, the culture of the people, and having all consideration, having the approach of whole of the society and whole of the government, we have prepared this. We have identified 8 priority sectors, and we have identified 13 climate hotspots like flood, cyclone, drought, and like others, even thundering also. And we have identified 113 actions for saving the people who are living in the flood-prone area and the coastal area, and the unnatural flood that it is in the Howard area. And this climate emergent situation, climate crisis situation, it has been intensified by the Ukraine-Russia war. And the sanction and anti-sanction sanctions given by different countries to different one. But majority of the people of this earth, they are the victim, they are the innocent victim. If we want to fight against the climate crisis, we must have to have the peaceful situation. Peaceful situation. Peace is the precondition for the existence of human being, for the existence of biodiversity, and for saving this planet, because this is the only one earth and only one life. We have to work having hand in hand and putting our shoulder to shoulder. The whole humanity, the whole people of the world is single. We have to realize this, and I will again giving my thanks and gratitude, and I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Monir Rizwan. I think Bangladesh is one of the champion countries when it comes to climate action. Also, I understand that the Bangladesh Parliament has endorsed a resolution last year on climate, declaring it a climate emergency, right? So let me move to Michelle Yonatani from UNHCR, and we know that UNHCR has been convening a consortium of thought leaders working on predictive analysis in the Sahel region. So can you tell us how the project supports UNHCR and partners to be fit for an increasingly uncertain future, and how can this further be scaled up?
Thank you, Animesh. Yes, I want to share with you this example of a UN system-wide approach or initiative, which in itself is somewhat unusual. It shouldn't be, but it is. So it's something we need to be promoting much more. And this is a project which very much focused on the Sahelian region, a region which many of you may be aware is seeing increasing temperatures at 1.5 times greater than the global average, where people are being repeatedly hit by so many different types of risks to do with climate, to do with the conflict, to do with impoverishment, and so on. So it's very much, I can't think of another region where this nexus issue is more relevant, essentially. So what do we do when we're talking about nexus? It's not just a nexus in terms of the problems that we're facing, the challenges that people are facing, but also nexus in terms of the need for a really integrated analysis, integrated use of data, and integrated action. So the collaboration within the UN system itself between many of the different agencies to break those silos which often exist. So UNHCR was basically asked by a body in the UN which works at very much the strategic level in coordinating across the different parts of the system. And UNHCR's role there was simply to really facilitate this, so not just putting UNHCR's concerns only in the center or even just climate in the center, but putting all the different concerns, the perspectives, the expertise, the sources of data, trying to bring them all together to have really an integrated understanding of the situation, but also to find methodologies that would help us to look forward, not just to respond, to react what's happening today, but to look forwards. That's what anticipatory action is all about, right? So basically, we now have a report. The report itself is a kind of proof of concept that shows indeed that there's a huge value to be had in this kind of initiative. I can tell you it's not so easy. When we talk about data sharing, for example, it's not that easy to first know where is the data, who has the data, how can you access it, how do you make all that data work together that you can even do analysis that makes sense. So that was certainly a huge part of it, but also the methodologies, whether it's to do with displacement itself, lots of questions here at COP that we're receiving as UNHCR around, the future in terms of people on the move, people becoming displaced from their homes, but also food, education, livelihoods, health, and so on. So we brought quite a few of those different methodologies, sources of data together in collaboration with over 20 different academic or research organizations, really doing some cutting edge work, but which hadn't necessarily been brought together before to look at what those different sources of data, those different methodologies can actually offer. And all of this has been done also in consultation, or not consultation, in support of the United Nations Integrated Strategy for the Sahel. So it's all within this broader development frame, if you like, and showing that with what we have now, we can already see some findings. So just to give you one example, what's very, very clear is that one of the strongest indicators of conflict, for example, to be able to predict conflict, is really understanding conflict that's already happening today. And in terms of climate change, the need to ensure that peaceful coexistence is really protected, both from the impacts of climate shocks, putting stresses on communities, but really understanding that in the round in relation to those specific situations across the region. So the report that we have now is really highlighting what we're calling vulnerability hotspots related to all of these multiple factors. And it's enabling what the special coordinator, the UN Special Coordinator for Development in the Sahel has said himself is really helpful, is that it's really helping to inform that strategic long-term analysis for where crisis may be arising. It's also an analysis which is shared. The language of one of the previous speakers was about a common narrative. Yes, a common narrative, a common analysis, so that we can actually collaborate and work together more easily. But also finally to note that he sees this very much as a longer-term challenge, and that what we're really trying to do here is indeed something quite transformative, quite ambitious. It's about changing mindsets. It's about changing culture. He talked about an anticipatory culture, something that really looks forward. So this is just what we can offer right now. If anyone would like to hear more and learn more about it, we're actually doing a soft launch of the report on the 16th next week with the UN Special Coordinator. So please feel free to join us, and I'm here if you'd like to learn about more after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I'll encourage the audience to also contact you in case they want to know more about the report. So let's move to Umu, young voices from the Sahel, young activists. So, how do you see youth engagement in the efforts that you're listening so far to help communities be better prepared to disasters through anticipatory action? And can you tell us a bit more about the actions taken in this sense in your region?
Merci pour votre question et l'opportunité qui
Thank you very much for your question and for giving me the opportunity to take part in this panel. First, I would like to remind you that the consequences of climate change affect the African continent disproportionately and in an unjust fashion. Africa is responsible for only 4% of world pollution, but it is extremely hardly hit by climate change. The African population, women, girls, youth are especially affected. In the Sahel region, we are hit by floods, droughts, deforestation, heat waves, and many other phenomena that lead to violent crises and even wars. In my country, the Republic of Guinea, we had previously a very beautiful landscape, and today we are very hardly hit by climate change. Now, you talk about anticipatory action. How can we anticipate? Well, I believe we need social innovations to anticipate. This would allow the affected communities to
qui les
meet their needs without needing to destroy the environment that surrounds them. It could, for example, be the creation of businesses for a just and just economy, and also to positively influence people's consumption models, for example. Now, let's come back to the issue of actions. We, the youth of the Sahel region, we have understood the importance of data when it comes to anticipating climate disasters, which is why we are committed in many institutions to collect data at a local level, because we need data that reflect the reality that we live so that we can implement the right anticipatory actions. In parallel, we are also raising awareness in schools about climate and climate change. We learn we teach, students to take care of the environment. We also raise awareness regarding the fight against climate change. We also go in communities where we organize educational workshops, and we try to raise awareness about the dangers that are coming and that are linked to climate change. In coastal areas, we also implement measures to protect harvests, but also to mitigate the effect of floods. We are also conducting reforestation campaigns, especially in urban contexts, which could prevent the harshest consequences of heat waves and of very strong winds. You know, in the Sahel region, we have many water sources, but if we don't act, these water sources are going to be extinct very soon. So we also need to ensure reforestation in these water-rich areas, which allows to prevent the degradation of water resources. We also promote biogas because it allows us to limit the massive destruction of forests as well as the emission of greenhouse gases in the environment. So we, the youth, we are committed. We make considerable efforts And even though they are not very visible because we lack a financial and a technical support. So we need to benefit from more financial and technical assistance so as for us to be able to impact positively our communities. We, the Sahel youth, we are determined to keep fighting for the survival of humanity because we are not planning to move on another planet. So we are also asking for every effort to be combined, be it at the government level, be it in institutions or within the civil society. We want positive results. And by positive results, well, I mean that we want to mitigate the effects of the climate change everywhere around the world. Thank you.
Very nice. So, I think the points that you're making are very important also in the context of the systems approach that was being mentioned, and in context that we cannot just look at things in isolation, and the nature-based solutions and ecosystems-based approaches that need to be always kept in the forefront. So, in all the panelists so far have talked about the importance of partnerships and collective action. So, coming from the Anticipation Hub, Nick, could you tell us a bit more about Anticipation Hub and how does it ensure that this collaboration and partnerships can strengthen for anticipatory action?
Yeah, thank you, Animash, for the question and also the invite. And it's wonderful to be here and also to see so many new faces. So the Anticipation Hub is a knowledge and exchange platform on anticipatory action hosted by the German Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent National Society and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and brings together actually more than 100 partners from science, policy and practice, be it national societies from the Red Cross, NGOs, research institutes, governmental bodies from global and local levels, working together to learn from each other and in order to improve and to scale up anticipatory action, or as we say, to do more anticipatory action, do better anticipatory action, and do it together. And is actually firmly grounded in practice. So, anticipatory action is being implemented now in more than 70 countries from a numerous organizations across the world, and the Anticipation Hub basically brings this knowledge, the experiences, the learnings together in one platform, so in one website. So this is really the core of us. So you will find basically when you go to the website on anticipation-hub.org, you'll find a global map on anticipatory action, a database on the triggers that have been used, that are being used, the evidence we have collated so far, and the anticipatory actions that are being implemented. And on top, numerous tools and reports developed by different implementing agencies. For instance, how to set up, how to develop an anticipatory action project, how to make use of impact-based forecasts. We give an overview of the available technical working groups on the different global, regional, and local levels. So, in short, it's really it's a massive knowledge platform. And next to tools and resources, it also provides opportunities to share. I mentioned it already: lessons learned and also ideas to advance anticipatory action virtually as well as in person. So, for instance, we hold annually regional dialogue platforms in Africa, the Asia Pacific, Latin America, the Caribbean, and also a global one. The next one is actually happening in a month's time from the 6th to the 8th of December in Berlin. So you're all cordially invited to join. It's a busy and fun space. And we host different working group and also a network, a young leaders network, and early warning and early action. And Uma, you just proposed also the idea. You said we need greater, social innovations to bring anticipatory action forward. This would exactly be the space to discuss such ideas. And I see I'm running out of time. There's one thing we also do, policy and advocacy. So we seek to bring these lessons we have learned to policy fora, such as COP, and also, for instance, for COP, develop this policy brief, how development and climate actors can help us to bring this approach to scale. So I highly want to encourage you to have a look and join the Anticipation Hub, and then the magic happens.
The magic will happen. So unfortunately, we are running almost out of time. So What I would do, not to make a big attempt to summarize, unfortunately, we will not have time for discussion and question and answers, but this dialogue is not stopping here. It's only kind of continuing as we have been talking about. But one thing which comes out very clearly that we need a shared understanding of risk, we need joint analysis, we need integrated planning, and we need joint implementation. Unless all the actors come together and make an effort to make this a collaborative process, we will collectively fail. So let's make it a collective success. What is also very important is that I really appreciate your point in terms of the social innovations, because it's just not about a technical process. It requires an all-out effort by multiple agencies. And this COP, we have seen the loss and damage agenda coming up so strongly across all the negotiations, but also substantive discussions. Anticipatory actions is one of the strongest tools and instruments for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. Let's make it a success. And one thing which I would really request all of you as we go back, that the challenge to make it a success is not just the actors who you heard today, but among all of us. Risk management is a shared business. It's everyone's responsibility. So when we go out, let's talk, let's collaborate, and see how we, each of us, can individually contribute to it through collaborative approaches. Thank you very much, and have a very successful rest of the COP.